Welcome to Values and Vibes. Today we're going to talk about self-awareness. I know that I have so many things that I need to change, but how I'm going to change anything if I'm not aware of that? So stay with us if you want to find out what you need to change to be more happier. Enjoy. Okay, welcome to Values and Vibes. Today we're going to talk about another value. It's self-awareness as a value with my two favorite, amazing two guests, Louisa and Tia. And of course, unfortunately, Joy is not here today with us. But
he is in spirit.
Yeah, can we
here.
what was the definition? Oh, he's here. Okay. Hi, Joy. Who's that? Who's that? So, Louisa, can you tell us what the definition about self-awareness as a value from Revaluate180?
Yeah, so self-awareness is to be alert to how our words and actions affect ourselves and others.
That's quite a good definition, because if you read self-awareness, it's not an easy word.
Well done, you.
Thank you. Well done. I think that self-awareness is one of those kind of interesting words. We all want to believe we're self-aware, that we know how our personality, our beliefs, our values, who we are, like how we're reflecting that upon the world, and being self-aware to know that about ourselves. I think, like I said, I think it's maybe a value that I bet you it's interesting. There's always those certain values. It'd be interesting to see who that comes in their top 8. It's either one I think that people can easily ignore, or another one that they can easily take for granted. I think like when we talked earlier and the other day about kindness, I think with something like kindness, when you're kind of being unkind, or you could have been kinder, or could have made an effort. But self-awareness, I think if you're not a self-aware person, you might not even know you're not self-aware. Does that make sense? So there's layers of it. You might not know how your words and actions are hitting other people or your behaviors. So I think that's the most important thing and maybe you develop more self-awareness as you age, or maybe you should, at least, because maybe wisdom brings self-awareness. Like my husband, Colin, always talks about sometimes in the workplace that people often, the best quality you can have is to know your highest, best use. It's meaning, like, don't fake it. I mean, you do fake it till you make it when you're climbing the corporate ladder, but be honest with yourself. If it's a job that you want to move up to, and there's just an entire segment of that position that you just can't fake your way through or even learn of it, then it'd be pretty non-self-aware to hop into that role. You'd be kind of setting yourself up for disaster. But I think self-awareness is something that we probably are striving for. So it almost feels like we can all be self-aware or be conscious of being self-aware, but it's almost like that nirvana state. Are we always really all as self-aware as we need to be? I don't know.
I was reading a Harvard Business Review article on self-awareness, and it was talking about an internal self-awareness, which is like what I really want, versus like an external one, what do other people see? So if you are so a lot of people say, oh, I'm very self-aware, I'm introspective, I think about it a lot. That's internal. That's like, what am I really wanting? But actually they might not be externally self-aware. So focusing on how they come across to other people, for example. So there's like a two sides of self-awareness, which I guess is kind of true, because you can be very self-aware of what you want, but not necessarily the impact that has on other people, or what that looks like, or how that comes across.
And very true. And I'm not sure if this article talked about it, but I think self-awareness is often maybe looked at more in do you know how you negatively impact people? I think that's the truly self-aware person. Maybe certain things that you say or do that trigger certain reactions. So I'm not saying that's
the external self-awareness, I think.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, your internal thoughts and discussions I agree, are internal, and what you're reflecting upon onto the world is almost like, but I think, no, because I think internally you can still reflect upon, do I understand the negative, like, energy, or the negative, like, input I sometimes am adding by this certain behavior that I have? So I think that can be both. I think you can internally contemplate it, but then actually take action. Because we were talking about this the other day, Louisa, like, people might say I'm self-aware. So internally they know, or they might even voice it. But if you don't change your behavior, then are you self-aware? Because then you don't really know how your behavior is reflecting into the world or how it's being perceived by others.
I think
So,
people just say it. I think it's something people love to say, because it's like, I spend a lot of time thinking, so I must be self-aware. But I think it's a hard, it's a hard thing to really, really be self-aware and to hold yourself up to a mirror and really know what is going on in your head and how that feels, and then also how you project that out into the world.
yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think self-aware a lot of times, like my mother-in-law, I mean, she passed recently and we miss her a lot. And, but I mean, the hardest part of being her daughter-in-law and knowing her since I was, 21 was, her lack of self-awareness that she was one of those individuals who was head to mouth. What she thought came out of her mouth. Maria can be a little bit like that, my youngest daughter. There's a certain level of honesty about that and realness, which you grow to love. But what was she self-aware that I mean, her family members also pointed out to her, and then it became funny as I no longer took offense to it. But sometimes head to mouth was something that like hit really hard, and it really was not, it was very critical of the person, of one of the people around her. But I guess, can I judge her self-awareness or not? Maybe she wanted to do, maybe that was just who she was, and she was perfectly self-aware that the impact that what she was doing was having. It's a very much a transcendent word that you can kind of go in circles with.
Yeah. Someone says, well, I'm aware of it. I know I'm like that. I mean, but still they need to manage that impact, right? So part of self-awareness is knowing that other people experience the world in a different way, and we need to be aware of how we can manage our impact with different individuals.
Right, or knowing that what this individual is either doing or saying is impacting others negatively, is I think the biggest one. I think that's when self-aware, I mean, when it's no longer internal, it becomes external. You're only looking at its negative implications. I don't think you're considering self-awareness very much when you're spreading peace and love and kindness, because that's, you might be self-aware internally. Oh, I'm being a kind person. But I think like value prioritization or even value contemplation, it doesn't come to the forefront of our mind until we know we've offended or hurt someone. And then maybe we realize that we're not too self-aware in certain circumstances. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think there's also a part internally of knowing who you are, I guess, and what you stand for. That's that internal self-awareness of young adults kind of going out into the world and really understanding themselves and what they truly want and what they truly stand for. There's that aspect of it. And then, you say
True.
old elders are wiser. Well, actually, maybe they're more self-aware. Maybe they know exactly where they stand on matters and what they want to get, and actually how they come across to the team around them. So maybe it's something that we learn over time because we actually become more comfortable in our own skin.
Right, I agree. It's kind of what I said the first time. Do we become self-aware as we obtain more wisdom in this life? Maybe a lot of it comes down to social etiquette and cues and whether or not something evokes tears or anger or,
I think we
it's
must,
experience.
because I think a good way to explain this to the podcast listeners is our halo blocker, which sits on the other side of the atlas, blocks this value pathway. So halo is when we judge people based on kind of their popularity or their personality. So people therefore get treated differently, because in our head, maybe someone who's very outgoing, loud and bubbly, they're my kind of person. So I'm actually going to be more drawn to them and treat them slightly different to someone who's a bit quiet. Things like this is what halo does. And I'm sure people have heard of like the halo effect as well in interview processes. And that blocks self-awareness. And I think probably a lot of young people naturally have a bit of the halo bias, because you're trying to be popular yourself, right? And you're trying to fit in, and you're finding a way to fit in.
Well, I mean, and it also makes sense. I mean, there was a young woman in our course, Kelly, did her dissertation on hire like me, like people, like often the halo blocker is going to come in with that because, oh, they're just like me. Oh, look, her hair's the same way and she dresses the same way, and oh, she must be great, and then she starts at work and you still treat her as if she's great, but Jane is doing a lot better work around the corner, who doesn't dress anything like you or have your personality. You're right. That's a lack of self-awareness for sure.
And
But it sounds like, what else does what else, what are the other, with Halo, what are the other cluster values that are blocked?
self-control, fairness, and honesty,
Yeah.
Interesting.
which
So-
makes a lot of sense.
I read an article earlier about self-awareness, and it said that it gave like 4 telltale signs when people aren't self-aware, and it said that typically, if you're not self-aware, you can be very defensive. You sometimes, people they're not fully trustworthy. They can be arrogant, and they lack sympathy or empathy. A person without self-awareness will struggle to put themselves in the shoes of other people because they're
Yeah.
aware of their emotions. They're often not able to see how their behaviors might be contributing to a situation at hand. Yeah.
If I think of if I think of people I know who, in my opinion, are not self-aware, they seem to just do what they want when they want and not managing their impact on other people. And I find that a little bit uncomfortable at times. I'm not saying I'm the most self-aware person in the world, but all I see from them is that external self-awareness, and I don't know, it just feels wrong in a way when you can see them. But maybe this is back to your question, Tia. Do they know they're like that?
Yeah.
Do they have what they think is that internal self-awareness?
I don't know, because I don't know that maybe they're able to communicate their message if they're not that self-aware. Do we make excuses sometimes for people?
I think it's used as an excuse. Well, I know I do it, so it's okay. I'm self-aware. I know I'm like that.
But if
So
you're like that, you're not self-aware to begin with, is really what it's like. It's circular. You know what I mean? The argument becomes very circular. It's interesting. It's really not much. I mean, sometimes self-awareness, I think, can be interchangeable, or people might believe it's interchangeable with mindfulness, but mindfulness is really more of a state of being, I think. And self-awareness is more a state of how you react and how you respond, and not understanding how its impact on others, which is very different. Where mindfulness is really, I feel like, I'd be interested in going back and reading that article you read, because I feel like that's the difference. Instead of calling that self-awareness, I think that's the difference between being mindful and being self-aware. That's why I feel like self-awareness, obviously he's some great scholar who probably wrote that article. But I mean, in my mind, I see that when your internal thoughts of being mindful of present moment actions. I'm in this moment. I know what I'm saying. I'm not thinking about the things around me. So I kind of think of it that way, but.
So they're saying internal self-awareness is how well you know yourself. So if you're high in this and you're not high on external, you're clear on who you are, but you don't challenge your views, and you don't search for your blind spots by getting feedback from others. So you are an introspector. You're in your mind, and
that's what I mean. That's why that's interesting. I look at that as you might be mindful in a sense. You've thought about it in the present moment. You might even know, this maybe doesn't land right in other people. You just don't care, I guess, if you're not self-aware.
But for me, being mindful is just a way to activate any values. It's a way to address any of your values that you have, not just self-awareness.
No, I agree. But mindful is its own value. And I think that you can activate values without really practicing. I'm not always sure I'm the most mindful person. I think a lot of my day I go through like routines. And I think that people who really are mindful, they are the people who are walking around this earth really in the present moment. I wish I was in the present moment. I spent half my life ruminating. So I wouldn't say that's top on my list. I think that a person who's highly self-aware is likely fairly mindful, because they're always mindfully in the moment, thinking about how, what their actions and reactions are going to be.
But those are different moments, whereas self-awareness is in regulation, because it's giving us a bit of a framework or a bit of structure around our life.
Yeah.
So it gives us a steadiness, self-awareness,
Right.
versus mindful. It's one of our debate.
But mindfulness is in personal empowerment then, right?
Yeah. So that can be in any scenario. I'm saying that self-awareness probably gives someone a bit more structure around their thought process.
I don't know. I mean, it could be the same for mindful though, because most mindful people who are highly mindful probably are pretty high achievers, because they're pretty focused. So I don't know. I mean, the words are all mushy.
That's not got anything to do with structure or like an established norm they're following. Whereas self-awareness is like, I know exactly who I am and where I'm going in life and how I come across to other people, and that's how I live my life. Mindful is just in any old moment thinking about, what do I need from this moment right now for me to succeed?
I think you have to be very self-aware to be very mindful. I don't think you have one without the other. I think a mindful person.
Well, you can, because you can in our model.
Well, no, I mean, they could be alongside each other because our values sit congruently. I think probably the most mindful and self-aware people probably have both fairly high up in my mind, because our values work together.
But they're not mutually exclusive, well, necessarily.
No, I mean, I just think that I think that the only reason why I brought up mindful is I think that's a word that people would often confuse with being self-aware, I think. Because if you're mindful of how your thoughts, I mean, I don't know the exact, do you have the deck there? Like, while we're sitting here, I guess you could skim through them. It's kind of interesting to me. I don't know. I guess to me, when I think about self-awareness, I think that people who are the most self-aware are probably fairly mindful. But I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just my own.
Yeah, but that's your opinion. You're allowed that as an opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't mean that happens statistically in our model.
Oh, I don't know. We've never run those statistics. We'll have to ask our mathematician, Renee. Maybe most people who put self-awareness in their final 8, maybe mindfulness is also in their top penultimate 16. It'd be interesting. Yeah, that's gonna be the most interesting things. Yeah, is to see how much our values as we go along, people's choices correlate with other values. Is there a correlation? And when one person picks one with the other, do they generally pick the other? That's, I don't know, it's interesting. Yeah. You're right. I mean, they're obviously very different. They sit in different zones, but I don't know. I guess I just think they may, maybe the people I meet and see, that I find people to be the most, I kind of think of Colin as both self-aware and mindful. I mean, it might be not always mindful with how the words he chooses with his spouse in a sense, because I think we're our worst selves and our best selves with the person we love the most. But I feel when I watch him as a leader that he's very self-aware of, he's not going to have, as he tells me, loose lips sink ships. Things aren't slipping out his mouth. He's very self-aware. He's not, you know what I mean? And I think that
I love that saying.
Yeah, because the girls always tell him that I told mom this, and she told one of the other sisters, and so, and he's always like, loose lips sink ships. It's like, okay, anyway. So, and
then girls, you're gonna love my slap of reality about self-awareness. So
okay, tell me, maybe
I used to work like a professor in a law high school. So there is a high school about law. They're preparing kids to be good lawyers. Probably you're coming from a lawyer family, and they start early from 15. So I was working there, and a lot of professors, they would go to a lot of seminars because we need some points to keep the license and everything. And then I spent 7 days with total strangers from other schools, and I'm self-aware about myself. And then the last day of seminar was, okay, I have some question for you guys, like sit together in the circle. I'm going to ask you, and then you're going to give the name, who is that person. So there's the first question, who is never late on seminar, because it's 7 days in a row. And they're like some guy, like Gary, for example.
Right.
Who is always making the longest emails? Milena. And I'm like, what?
So yeah, you completely has no self-awareness with that.
And I'm like, what? No. That's a lie. Then there was who was always present in the moment when we speak, and who is a good listener? Milena. And I was like, no, I think I'm a little shallow. I'm not listening to people so much. No, that's my opinion. Right. Then they asked, like, who is talking too much? Milena.
I think you must have just had the most impact on the group, which I'm not surprised.
And I was like, stop it. Like, I have interesting stories. Like, and then they said, like, I don't know, like 30 questions. I was main reason to be like, my name was always. And then I was like, can you share those results, because 7 people, there was like, I don't know, sometimes 7, sometimes 10, but there was a lot of answers, and I said, can you send me those answers? I need to see that, because total stranger that said that about me, all of it's true, So then I sit and I read all of those. It was completely opposite that I think that I am.
Yeah.
Completely opposite.
That's funny. That the only example that resonates with me is I oftentimes meet people who don't know me that well, but have like many dinners over the years, especially on Wall Street with Colin. And then they'll be with me again and they'll talk about that I am this complete type A personality. And I think I've always told people in my world that I'm an accomplished type B, because I guess in my life, I lived around so many type A's, like my mother, like if we spilled something in the house, I would rather like be, sent away to a prison camp where they beat me because I was so afraid of what she was going to do. Right. Or if like, just, it was very much, very organized, very strict. She always looked perfect. So in my mind, I was kind of like 80%. Colin always called me an 80%er. Like unless it's something I really was committed to, I got to 80% and then I was just bored. Or if something's broken in my house and I get used to not using it. Oh, microwave doesn't work. Fine, I don't need a microwave. I mean, no one uses a microwave in this country. You know what I mean? Just so I find that really difficult. But strangers who meet me always talk about how that I'm this type A person, and I guess I have a lot of energy, and maybe, and
The
I
thing
know.
is, you're confident, and I think what happens is confidence gets misconstrued into kind of dominance at times. And I think if my story is similar in a way of thinking what you guys are saying about self-awareness, is I try a lot now to talk less in social situations, because if you were inside my head, the reason I do it is because if I'm around people who are quieter, I always expect a lot of my friends or people at work to let me steer the conversation. Or when you have to do group work and it's people you barely know, they all look at me and it's I have to present it, and I'm like, well, I don't mind, so I'll do it, whatever. But now I'm very aware of, I don't want that to come across as I'm love the sound of my own voice or I'm dominating the conversation, because that's not my intention. My intention is, if no one's going to talk, do you want me to start the conversation? But it's a fine line of knowing that they're not in my head, so they can't see my intention. I think when I was younger as well, if someone was telling me a story about their life, I would then try and relate it to one of mine to show them I was relating. But actually, does that come across as I'm turning it to talk about me? So I've learned certain niche things like that over time, because what I was intending maybe was different to how it was landing. And maybe it's a similar thing with you, Tia, where people go, oh, well, there's two kind of like very confident people coming in, they'll talk, they must be type A.
Maybe so, just maybe my ethnicity, and I'm Italian and I'm
No, but for
energetic.
me, I think they put also that, and they put also I was the most popular. I was always the answer. Whatever they asked, I was the answer. And I said, can you change the name? Can you just change the name? And then they would say that like sometimes I'm rude. I'm like giving like honest opinion about something nobody asked me. And I was like, probably it's true. And then I saw the answers. I'm telling you, I was thinking a lot more than some if my, because I did that with my family also. They give me like we were doing, who is not putting laundry, like who is not cleaning by, like who is not washing dishes, whatever. They were doing like names just to realize who is doing that in family, just to not mention, just to share like
Good.
what I think about each other.
It brings accountability. Maybe I should do that at Revaluate 180.
No, really, really, it was like it's like this lack of reality. Like
It can be, I think it's painful. I think it hurts your heart, because what your intentions might be as good as they are, if it comes across a certain way, you have to address it. I've always been told that I'm terrible at taking on board criticism, and that's because I was criticized a lot, not by my parents, but as a kid, and I hate it, and I've learned to build a defense mechanism around it. So when it came to later on in life, like my friends will say, I can't take, you play these games, who can't take criticism, whatever, and then like, everyone pointed at me, and I was like, okay. And then I had to really think about it, because what I do is if someone gives me critique, I want to ask some questions about it. So the first thing I do is, okay, well, where did that come from? Because I'm trying to understand it. But actually, all that looks like is you're not taking it. So I've really tried to, and I've really tried to do a way, like find a way of saying, I understand it, and to grow from it, I will, and I ask.
I agree. That's hard. Well,
But
that's
it's
just hard to
not.
hear anything negative, like in a sense, it reflects in your own mind, and you're not perceiving those things. Then it's like, whoa, it's like a slap in the face.
But
And
it's
it's
an
hard.
ego. It's your
Yeah.
ego.
10 completely strangers. They told me so much truth. And you know, I was like aggressive. I was loudest in the room. And they're like,
Yeah.
I'm like, what? And then they washed themselves because it was like I was happy because they say who is the most popular in the room. And I was like,
Exactly.
and I said,
Well,
okay, guys, love me. You're not
that probably goes hand in hand. Probably, I mean, I imagine someone who's most liked is also the most criticized. It's like political figures in some ways, because, usually what's good makes you bad, right? I always tell my kids that.
Yeah.
Your best quality is often your worst quality. You know what I mean? Because like when it's overdone, kind of like our values, it's too much, and it has negative consequences, or it has negative ramifications. So I agree. It's been interesting. I learned a lot from this.
I think one podcast we can do about examples like who is that from three of us, just to see how it looks.
Yeah, that would be fun.
We spend so much time on these podcast calls, so we can
Be careful, loose lips sink ships. I might be sharing it with too many people.
Who is too honest? Who is giving the most tips, Tia?
Exactly.
But
I think it's just part of learning and growing.
Of course. So my last question, or it's if you want, like, can you give me an example? What did you hear through life, and you weren't at all self-aware that you were doing that, and it was like really hard to be aware now that you're really doing that.
I have a good one, and Louisa brought that to my mind. I think that when I was in my younger adult self, I had certain biases based upon like how like I would what my family believed, what I was taught, but wherever it came from, but just comes from kind of like where values are kind of begin in the early parts of life. And I often like spoke from a place where I had no business speaking, because I didn't have enough information to speak on a topic. And I think that I have stepped away from offering information when if I have not been extremely well read and have something to add that actually makes sense, you're better off just saying, I don't really have an opinion on that because I don't know that area well enough. And I think that I became more self-aware that that's okay to not know something about everything. And you actually look like the stronger, smarter, more self-aware person when you don't always add, unless you have something. I always find that like my oldest daughter's the quietest, and she's the writer and she's an observer. And I feel as if she's like her father that way. She speaks when spoken to, or she says something, and then it really has impact. So I think there. And my mom would always say that when I was raising the kids, don't use a lot of words. It's no, they don't need a lot of words. And I think that sometimes there's just not a lot of words. And you just, that's being more self-aware. So I think that's the lesson I had to learn. Because sometimes I walked away from evenings out or something, and I think I'd kind of be embarrassed of myself. Like, okay, what was I doing speaking from a place where I have no idea what I'm talking about? So I've worked on that. I think I don't do that like I used to. I mean, I talk about things that I have knowledge of and try not to pipe in when I'm completely clueless.
Yeah. I don't know. I've probably gone through a long journey of really knowing who I am and not taking offense by criticism. It probably is one thing that I'm very independent to my own detriment, that I can block myself off and try and like protect that and what I am. So being able to break that boundary and listen to that feedback is something I've definitely learned over time. But more on a funny note is like my siblings would always say to me when I was younger, like, you hold grudges, you can't let anything go. And honestly, at the time of being a teenager, I was like, I really don't see this. Anyway, fast forward. Oh my, I am the biggest grudge holder. I love it. I wear it as the badge of honor. I hold grudges. I can't let things go. if I forgive you, I haven't forgotten it, because I can remember it, and I can tell you exactly what you said to me 11 years ago on the 7th of July. Like, it's a thing that I've fully accepted now, because I use it as a protective mechanism. It makes me a very skeptical person, which can be helpful because I don't take anything at face value. But I have to know, I have to learn still. I haven't done it yet, how to let things go. We did forgiveness as a podcast, and in that we talked about this. And that for me is something I'm aware of. So I have the self-awareness, but I haven't yet done anything about it because I don't know how. And I think that's also okay. And I think I'll learn
Yeah, I
that
think
over
so.
time.
And I think that's what before Milena shares hers. I think that's what's kind of great about the blockers in our model. I think because the blockers, we talk about them, these unconscious biases, as being things that could be tempered or honed, and like what's good makes us bad. Oftentimes these blockers are good things. That could even be related to Louisa's shoulder blocker. When you shoulder everybody else's problems, you even are shouldering that rumination thing that I have. I also have a shoulder blocker. So you're shouldering that burden of like someone maybe really hurt you as well. And so that kind of goes with that, kind of shouldering everything and not being able to let go. But I think that's the greatest thing, because the shoulder blocker also has so many. I think that I've been able to deal with a lot more of maybe my lack of self-awareness for things that you don't like about yourself with our blocker language, because it kind of, and that's why we created it in the way that we did. And so people don't have to feel ashamed when they choose a certain blocker, because it's something that really can work well in their lives if it's controlled and if it's honed. And so I think that was an interesting thing. I think that you're trying to hone it, you're trying to control it, not holding grudges, but you got to hold a little grudge, or maybe it's no longer a grudge, but it's a little memory, like you're not going to get burned again. You're going to watch out.
You can learn.
Yeah, exactly. Fun as always, Milena.
Thank you so much for watching us, and see you when we talk about next value.